Channel today. Thank you for tuning in and being with us. We're glad to welcome Richardson, licensed professional counselor and founder and clinical director of the Brain Performance Center. Joining us today to talk about a spike in road rage. It's affecting the nation, and even here in Washington State, in Seattle, you may have heard about a community leader who was gunned down in Capitol Hill 2 days ago because of road rage, and we're going to talk to Leigh about this. Leigh, welcome to the program today.
Well, thanks for having me.
Well, let's talk about what we're seeing across the country. You know, here in Washington, Washington State Patrol said there are 465 road rage shootings across the state in 2018. That went to 807 in 2020, and last year it went to 1,058. So we're seeing over than 100% increase, and I know we're seeing this across the country as well. What's going on here?
Well, it is across the country, and the scary fact is in 2022, someone was shot and injured or killed in a road rage incident on the average of every 16 hours.
Wow.
That's very frightening. And I think that, what I've seen is that some states have changed the rules and what governs people's ability to carry conceal a weapon, and some states are lessening the responsibility. I mean, you don't even have to have a license to carry a weapon in some states. And there's definitely been some research that correlates that the states that don't require a permit have had they've had, I think, almost triple the rate of road rage than those that have the most protective standards. So other than, I think, people, there's so much uncertainty in our world today, and there has been, I think, since for the last 3 years. I think COVID-19 started that. But that level of uncertainty, that level of fear puts us all, it knocks our body into that fight, flight, or freeze state.
Yeah, I mean, so the situation that happened 2 days ago here in Seattle, a young community leader, he picked up his nephew at an apartment building. They were going down to see the monster truck show, and they got into his car just on a city street, not on the highway, and a scooter was coming by, and he probably didn't look and probably didn't see the scooter, and he almost hit the person on the scooter. So the person in the scooter got upset and kind of started kicking the car, and then they got into some kind of verbal altercation, and the person on the scooter had a gun and shot and killed the driver. Also shot a 9-year-old his 9-year-old nephew who was in the car as well. This is we don't see this kind of thing happening, do we, in other countries? Why are we the country that's seeing this happen so much in?
Well, we have a lot more guns in this country than most other countries do. And guns are just a way of life in the United States. It's our Second Amendment. We're entitled to have them. I think if there's anything that causes more controversy, in my life, it's about what's going on with guns in the United States. It's a political subject. It's a personal subject. It breaks my heart to see what is going on. And I don't know if you've noticed or not, Tim, but even driving, yesterday I was sitting at a red light and it turned green, and I started to release off of my brake, and 2 cars went right in front of me. I mean, I've seen more and more people just running red lights, not stopping at stop signs. Now, our behavior is really getting a little risky, and I think a lot of that is because of the uncertainty in the air.
Yeah, I mean, talk about that. Can you dive into that? I mean, what you oversee, the Brain Performance Center. Why would talk about the uncertainty, and then talk about what it does to the brain, and then talk about why that would alter decisions.
Well, the uncertainty, I mean, it was the Ukraine-Russian war. That's been there for a year now. I mean, there's always something going on. Is COVID gone? Is it still here? If you're a senior citizen, should you still be concerned? You wake up and you hear one of the largest. I did hear this in the news. One of the largest banks has crashed. Well, immediately I thought of my bank. I mean, all these little things. I heard that gas is going up this morning, and it's a sizable increase. So there's always this stuff going on in our economy. Are we in recession? We got the job numbers today, and all of those things, they play into our mind, and they create that uncertainty. When I heard a large bank crash, I'm like, oh my gosh, is it my bank? You know, how am I going to make payroll if my bank has crashed? And so all of that plays into it.
But Leigh, is that I mean, all the things you just mentioned, I mean, those things were happening 30, 40 years ago, right? I mean,
absolutely.
So what's the difference?
We didn't have them streaming at us 24/7 that long ago. I mean, it was on the 6 o'clock news, and we didn't hear it again. And we have news coming at us. I open up my email, and there's news. I open up my cell phone, and there's news. So I think it's the amount of information that we have coming at us that certainly plays into that. And I think the intensity that we operate at, we live in the moment now. We have instant gratification. If I do something, I expect an instantaneous response. And all of that messes with the brain. The brain controls everything you do, but the autonomic nervous system controls the body. And the autonomic nervous system is that fight, flight, or freeze. And really, Tim, the window of tolerance to keep that system balanced isn't that big. So it doesn't take a whole lot to throw us off. And once we get that communication between the brain and the body gets kind of knocked out of balance, it stays off until we can go in and we can correct it. And when you're in that fight, flight, or freeze, you're riding that roller coaster. 1 minute, when you want to fight, you're mad. When you want to flight, you're overwhelmed with it. And when you're freezing, you just want to lay on the floor and hope somebody throws a blanket over you. Mental health is brain health. And mental health today is so different than it was 30 or 40 years ago. Before the pandemic, research showed 1 out of 4 Americans suffered with a mental health or a substance abuse issue. And I've seen a lot of numbers since the pandemic, but I haven't seen them validated. But I mean, everyone knows it's worse now than it was then.
Yeah. Let's talk about, I mean, this is an interesting subject because, my grandparents' generation, which was more self-reliant, more willing to be private and not vulnerable about issues and things that they're struggling with and kind of holding things in. And there's negatives to that, right? And maybe there's positives to that. And then you transpose that with today, which is, we have a kind of a therapeutic culture now where we're very willing to, oh yeah, I'm in therapy, and yeah, I'm on these drugs, and yeah, I'm depressed, and like that's a totally different kind of 180. And there's positives to that, and there's probably negatives to that as well. Can you talk about? And with that, you talk about the just the preponderance of folks being on drugs, right? And man, oh gosh, I'm feeling sad today, so man, maybe I should get on antidepressants, right? And I don't say that flippantly. I just say that we live in a time now where I know that doctors and others, they're more willing to just say, hey, okay, get on these drugs. But at the same time, how much of that is really hurting our society? And not to just get nuclear here, but, all of these shooters, mass murder shooters over the last 15 years, guess what's the one thing they have in common? They're on a lot of drugs, a lot of antidepressants, a lot of different things like that. I mean, yeah, guns plays an issue, but what about the kind of drugs we're feeding into our bodies?
Well, you've definitely hit a hot spot with me on that one. It's so interesting because medication has never really worked for me. And medication, is drugs. Ritalin is speed. All these things that we use for ADHD and the different things we use for anxiety and depression. And it's become it's like the magic wand. We're going to give you this pill and everything's going to get so much better. And I think what we're beginning to learn over time is it doesn't work that way. Some people can take a pill and it does help and it calms them down. Some people take that very same pill and those are synthetic chemicals and it affects their metabolism differently. It affects their mood. It affects their impulsivity and it makes them react differently in different situations. So I think that certainly the amount of synthetic chemicals, a lot of the same chemicals are sold in prescription drugs that are sold on the streets. And we know that they change our behavior. We know they change our thinking and that we lose sight of what consequences are.
So, tell us more. Are you at a point where we need to really take a hard look at what we're doing and to the degree to what we're giving, particularly young people, these kinds of synthetic drugs?
Well, I'll be the first to say I'm not licensed to manage meds, have no desire to be, but what my advice is to every client that comes into the Brain Performance Center, because I get asked about drugs all the time. Medication, should I be on it? Should I not be on it? And my only answer is that medication would never be my first response to a problem. I would try to solve that problem another way. And whether that's with counseling or whether that's with, of course, different things that we do here, neurofeedback, neurotherapy, meditation, prayer, whatever that you can tap into, whether it's your spiritual side, your emotional side. But medication would never be the first thing I did. Now, certainly, there's times I've taken medication and times I'm sure I will again, but carefully. And the brain's not fully developed until you're in your mid to late 20s. So I had kids, and certainly I thought about before I put them on medication, let me try and see what I can do. Making sure they get enough sleep, making sure they're eating right, getting their nutrition right. There's so many things that we can control on our own, and we're just now becoming fully aware of that.
We're talking to Leigh Richardson. Leigh is the founder and clinical director of the Brain Performance Center. We'll take a quick break on Live from Seattle. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Live from Seattle. Thank you for being with us on this soggy Thursday. And we're so glad, though, to have Leigh Richardson with us, the founder and clinical director of the Brain Performance Center. Leigh's devoted her life to studying the brain and its impact on behavior. And we've been talking about just the spike of road rage incidences and how that's impacted here locally and in our country. And, we were talking about a lot of things, Leigh, in that first segment, and which is good. And let's dive back a little bit into this. We brushed on this a little bit, but you're part of a group called Every Town for Gun Safety. This is, as you mentioned, a sensitive topic for many. I've said here on this program, I don't really understand why, as a believer in our Constitution, as a believer in our amendments, as a believer in our country, and the right to bear arms. I'm a believer of that. I'm not a guns guy, but at the same time, I don't understand why people need to be walking around with assault rifles at the same time. Talk about your advocacy work on this.
Well, I'm a big believer that people don't need to be walking around with weapons that our police don't even have access to. It does not make sense to me. And you mentioned earlier the mass shootings, and the one thing, there's another consistent factor that's been found in mass shootings and killings, and that is that the person doing the shooting has been bullied. They've been hurt. So the access, it's so easy to get guns. And maybe we've made it a little harder. Maybe we're going to do a background check. But I think the availability, what you have at your fingertips, and the lack of, I don't know what the right word, the sense of agency around controlling that feeds into it. I do not understand why anybody would need an automatic rifle. Why do you need an A-15? I don't even know if that's the right thing you call them. But why would anybody have a need for that?
Yeah, it's been my question as well. I've talked to friends of mine here on the program, Republican leaders who have said they use them for hunting. And shoot, I mean, that's fine. You want to use it for hunting. But is it worth it, right? Is it worth it for many other psychotic people who have probably dealing with a drug episode to have them as well? To me, that's not worth. Why don't you have something else? Why don't you take a bow and arrow out there or something?
Well, and if you have an automatic rifle, are you hunting? Or are you just shooting?
Right.
So it is a hot button for me, and I know for a lot of people too. And in Texas this week, 2 toddlers have died by a gun that they found. No, I'm sorry, 1 toddler died, and the other was sent to the hospital. But they found guns in their home, and they were loaded, and they shot them. And wow. That breaks my heart. A 3-year-old. And I know there's no easy answer, and I know that the problem is everybody has an idea of what the right answer is. We just don't all agree on it.
Yeah. Well, as we talked about, we're at a time we're living with a lot of stressors, a lot of anxiety. One thing that's frustratingly to me is with people, obviously they blame the pandemic for a lot of these actions, talking about road rage and other actions that are happening, violent actions. And I do have to tell you, it gets and I always see this in newspaper articles and stories, and people say, because of the pandemic, people are now dealing with more severe mental health issues and so on and so forth. And that is frustrating to me, Leigh. And I don't know, I have no clue what your stance is on this, and feel, you can share it here. But it wasn't because of the pandemic. It was because of the policies in our response to the pandemic. To me, that created more of the mental health issues, and all of the anxiety and fear around it was because of our policies and response to the pandemic, not the pandemic itself. And to me, that's frustrating, because there's an old saying about self-inflicted wounds. And I think we have dealt a significant, maybe the most significant self-inflicted wound on our country than I can remember in my lifetime.
Well, certainly the pandemic changed our lives. I mean, when you're a 12-year-old, your whole sense of community is who you hang out with at school. That disappeared. A lot of people couldn't go to church. A lot of people couldn't go to the gym for 6 weeks. So much of our sense of community was lost during the pandemic. That changed our behavior. And I think that being isolated, having no sense of normalness in your life certainly changes the way we act. We look at our policymakers and the decisions, and we're still talking about whether or not we need to wear a mask. I'll hear that on the radio every now and then, and to mask or not to mask. And it's certainly this situation played into our emotions and into logical thinking.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that, again, it was self-inflicted. People played after the first couple months, we kind of knew, we had enough data to know, what was happening with this thing, and that some of these things we did were kind of scorched earth policy methods that really destroyed people's psyches. And I think a lot of what we went through was completely unnecessary and unfortunate. And now everyone's paying the price for that, not because of the pandemic, but because of the absolute fearful. And I don't want to know if it was political or maybe it was. I'm sure it was, but it was I think it's just a stain on our nation. I mean, you look at Sweden to this day. Initially, people were lampooning Sweden early on for their response, and you look now at how they handled it, and their death rate, which is way lower than ours is, and way lower than European countries. They handled it correctly. They handled it right. They didn't play into the absolute pandemonium and fear that a lot of others, like the United States, played into.
Well, you make a good point there, and the United States did react differently than the European countries. And at the end of the day, I honestly think that hopefully we've learned some lessons from the COVID-19 pandemic, and how our leadership reacts in crisis will be different, and that we won't find ourselves in this situation again.
Leigh, talk to us about, give us the story, the origins of the Brain Performance Center, and what you've learned over the years that you think could be helpful to our listeners about what you've learned around the brain and its impact on our behavior.
Well, one of the things I've learned about the brain is everything you do and you don't do and how well you do it, that's all about what's going on with the brain. And that we all have the abilities to create change in our brain. And that, some people do that different ways. Some people will get strength from spiritually, from religion. Some people will get strength from actually talk therapy. Cognitive therapy is very beneficial, and some people want to create change in the brain, doing neurofeedback and creating neuroplasticity. And I think that one of the things that my biggest takeaway, and I will leave you with this, is brain health is mental health. And the brain is an organ just like the heart is. Just like skin. Skin is our largest organ that we have. And people, when you think about it, every woman has a regimen that they go through with their skin in the morning and in the evening. Because, it's important to us to look our best. We all need to have that same regimen with our brain. So if I can leave you with some parting comments, it would be, pay as much attention to your brain as you do any other organ in your body.
How can we do that?
Well, how you do that is, that's a good question, because not everybody does it the same way. Everybody has to figure out a way that's right. But it just my answer to that question would be, take 5 minutes a day, 10 minutes a day, and meditate. Find some peace and find some calmness from within. And I can't thank you enough for having me on the show. It has been a pleasure to talk with you. And if you ever want to talk more brain health, please, I'd be happy to talk with you.